In the 1970s and 1980s, appearing on The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson could instantly change a performer's career. Millions of Americans watched every night. One successful interview could launch a star overnight. But one appearance ended very differently. A young celebrity walked onto the stage expecting laughter and promotion. Instead, the moment turned tense, awkward, and unforgettable. Within days, she was quietly banned from returning. No official announcement was ever made. What exactly happened that night? In October 1962, American television entered a new era. That was the year Johnny Carson took over as host of The Tonight Show. The program aired on NBC and quickly became one of the most watched late-night shows in the country. Night after night, millions of Americans tuned in. They watched from living rooms, from small apartments, and from homes across the United States. The show became a nightly routine for many families before bedtime. The set was simple: a desk, a couch for guests, a curtain behind the stage. Bright studio lights filled the room while cameras rolled quietly from different angles. But behind that simple setup was enormous influence. Carson's stage had the power to change careers. For comedians especially, appearing on the show could be life-changing. A strong performance could turn an unknown performer into a national name almost overnight. Many famous comedians later shared the same story. They arrived at the studio nervous and unknown. They left with phone calls from agents, producers, and television networks. One appearance could open doors across Hollywood. During the 1970s and 1980s, television worked very differently than it does today. There were only a few major channels. Cable television was still growing. The internet did not exist. That meant national exposure was rare. If a performer appeared on Carson's show, millions of people saw them at the same moment. Studios paid close attention. Movie executives watched closely. Record labels watched closely. Talent scouts also watched every episode. A guest who made the audience laugh could see their career grow immediately. But the stage also carried risks. Johnny Carson was known for his calm style, but he was also quick-witted. His humor could turn sharp when conversations became uncomfortable. Interviews were often unscripted. Guests could not rely on prepared lines or rehearsed answers. The conversation moved quickly, and Carson expected guests to keep up. Some performers handled the pressure easily. Others struggled. Over the years, several interviews became famous for awkward moments. Sometimes a guest misunderstood a joke. Other times a conversation drifted into uncomfortable territory. Carson usually managed these situations with humor. A quick joke, a change of subject, a smile toward the audience. Most tense moments ended with laughter. But occasionally something different happened, something that even Carson could not easily smooth over. Behind the scenes, producers understood the risk. They carefully selected guests who could entertain the audience while keeping the conversation friendly. Still, surprises happened. One particular appearance in the late-night studio would become one of the most talked-about moments in the show's long history. It involved a young woman. Her career was growing quickly. She had already gained public attention and media coverage. Fans admired her bold personality. But that same personality sometimes made television executives uneasy. Producers believed her appearance could bring excitement to the show. Yet some also wondered whether the interview might become unpredictable. On the evening of the broadcast, the studio audience arrived as usual. They filled the rows of seats beneath the bright stage lights. Cameras moved into position. Crew members checked microphones. The band finished playing its opening music. Then Johnny Carson walked to his desk and greeted the audience with his familiar calm smile. Soon the guest would join him on the stage. At first, the conversation would seem normal. But before that tense moment ever happened, the guest herself had already built a reputation that made producers nervous. By the late 1970s, the entertainment world was changing. A new generation of performers was beginning to rise. Many of them were younger, more outspoken, and less willing to follow the traditional rules of Hollywood interviews. Among them was a young celebrity whose popularity had grown quickly. She had already appeared in television programs, films, or major public events that brought her national attention. Audiences recognized her face. Magazines printed her photographs. Entertainment reporters followed her career closely. But fame had arrived fast. And with fame came a reputation. Some journalists described her as fearless. Others described her as unpredictable. She spoke openly during interviews and often shared opinions that many celebrities preferred to keep private. For fans, this honesty made her fascinating. For television producers, it created uncertainty. In the world of late-night television during that era, interviews followed an unwritten script. Guests usually arrived with a clear purpose. They promoted a new movie, a new album, a television show. The conversations stayed light. The host asked friendly questions. The guests shared amusing stories from their work. The audience laughed. Everyone looked relaxed. But not every performer liked following those rules. This particular guest had already shown that she preferred honest conversation over careful promotion. In earlier interviews, she sometimes spoke about personal experiences or controversial topics. Entertainment magazines occasionally printed headlines about her comments. Some praised her courage. Others criticized her openness. Still, her rising popularity made her an appealing guest for television shows. Viewers were curious about her. They wanted to hear what she might say next. Producers at The Tonight Show knew this. When her appearance was scheduled, the booking created quiet excitement inside the studio offices. A guest with strong opinions could make the interview memorable. Memorable television meant strong ratings, but it also meant risk. Staff members discussed the upcoming interview carefully. They reviewed her past interviews and public appearances. Some moments had been funny and charming. Others had become tense. Still, Johnny Carson had handled thousands of interviews during his career. He had spoken with actors, musicians, politicians, and comedians. Few situations surprised him. The producers believed Carson's calm personality would keep the conversation smooth. On the day of the broadcast, preparations moved quickly. The studio crew adjusted the lighting. Microphones were tested. The band rehearsed its opening music. Backstage, guests waited for their turn to appear on camera. The rising star prepared to step onto one of the most famous stages in American television. Outside the studio, millions of viewers would soon be watching. Inside, the audience waited for another entertaining interview. But few people realized how quickly the atmosphere would change once the conversation began. Because when the interview finally started, the discussion moved in a direction that neither Johnny Carson nor the producers expected. The studio lights were bright that evening. Inside the NBC studio in Burbank, California, the audience waited quietly as the next guest was introduced. Johnny Carson sat behind his desk, holding his cue card while the band finished playing the transition music. Then the young celebrity walked onto the stage. The audience applauded politely. Some viewers recognized her immediately. Others were curious about the confident young woman stepping toward Carson's desk. She smiled and took her seat on the couch. At first, everything felt normal. Carson greeted her warmly. He asked the usual opening questions about her recent work and upcoming projects. His voice was calm and relaxed, just as it had been for thousands of interviews before. The guest answered politely. The audience laughed at a few light jokes. The rhythm of the conversation seemed comfortable. For a moment, the interview looked like any other late-night appearance. But the tone began to shift. Carson asked a question about her career and how quickly it had grown. Instead of giving the expected promotional answer, the guest responded in a more direct way. Her tone was honest. Some viewers in the studio leaned forward, unsure how the moment would unfold. Carson tried to guide the conversation back towards safer topics. This was something he had done many times before. When interviews drifted into awkward territory, he usually solved the problem with humor. Sometimes a quick joke could reset the entire conversation. But this time the exchange continued to move in a different direction. The guest spoke openly about subjects that late-night interviews rarely touched at the time. She shared opinions that sounded more serious than the usual light talk show stories. Carson listened carefully. His expression remained calm, but observers later noted that he seemed slightly cautious. The audience reacted in small waves. Some people laughed nervously. Others stayed silent, unsure if the moment was meant to be humorous. Live television can feel unpredictable. There is no pause button. There is no editing room to remove uncomfortable moments. Every word happens in real time. Behind the cameras, producers watched the interview closely from the control room. They monitored the conversation while keeping an eye on the clock. Talk show segments followed strict timing. Each guest appearance had to fit into the program schedule. But timing was no longer the main concern. The conversation was becoming tense. Carson asked another question, trying once again to bring the discussion back to familiar territory. He smiled toward the audience and added a quick remark, hoping to restore the lighter tone. For a moment, the audience laughed again. But the calm moment did not last long. The guest responded with another unexpected comment. According to several accounts from television historians, her reply sounded blunt and unusually personal for a late-night program. The room grew quiet. Carson paused briefly before speaking again. His experience allowed him to keep the show moving, but viewers could sense that the conversation was no longer comfortable. Moments like this were rare on The Tonight Show. For nearly 2 decades, Carson had built a reputation for smooth interviews and gentle humor. Most guests left the stage smiling. This interview felt different. As the segment continued, the audience's reaction became more uncertain. Applause sounded softer. Laughter arrived later than usual. Some viewers later said the entire exchange felt tense. Others believed the moment was simply misunderstood. But inside the studio, the mood had clearly changed. Carson eventually began wrapping up the interview. Talk show hosts often do this when time is running short or when a conversation loses its rhythm. He thanked the guest for appearing. The band prepared to play the closing music for the segment. The audience applauded again, though the sound carried a slightly awkward tone. The guests smiled and left the stage. From the television audience at home, the moment may have seemed brief. Just another interview among thousands that Carson conducted during his long career. But inside the studio, people noticed the tension. Behind the curtains, producers spoke quietly with one another. Some crew members exchanged glances. They had watched many interviews over the years. This one felt different. Carson finished the rest of the show professionally, just as he always did. The cameras kept rolling. The audience continued to laugh at the monologue and other guests. Yet something about that interview lingered in the air. Within hours of the broadcast, conversations inside the production office suggested that the guest might never be invited back. When the studio lights finally turned off that night, the audience slowly left the building. Outside, the streets of Burbank looked calm and ordinary. But inside the production offices of The Tonight Show, quiet conversations were beginning. Late-night television operated on a tight schedule. Every episode required careful planning. Producers worked daily to select guests who would keep the show entertaining and smooth. Most viewers never saw that process. Behind the scenes, a small team reviewed upcoming appearances, balanced personalities, and tried to avoid unpredictable situations. Johnny Carson played a major role in that process. Although the show had producers and network executives, Carson's opinion carried enormous weight. After hosting the program for many years, he had earned a level of trust that few television personalities ever reached. If Carson liked a guest, that guest often returned many times. If Carson felt uncomfortable with someone, invitations sometimes stopped. And usually the public never heard about it. There were no official statements. No announcements. The guest simply never appeared again. According to several television historians and former staff members who later spoke about the show, Carson valued respect and comfort on a stage. He believed interviews should feel natural and enjoyable for both the host and the guest. If that balance disappeared, he preferred to move on quietly. After the tense interview with a young celebrity, producers reportedly discussed the situation privately. Some believed the moment had simply been awkward. Others felt the conversation had crossed a line that late-night television at the time rarely allowed. During the 1970s and 1980s, American talk shows followed different expectations than today. Hosts controlled the tone. Guests usually avoided controversial topics. And the goal was simple entertainment. But the guests' direct comments had created a moment that felt unusual for Carson's program. The next step was subtle. There was no official ban announced on television. No newspaper headline declaring that the celebrity had been removed from the show. Instead, The decision appeared quietly in the show's booking schedule. Future guest lists were prepared. Her name was never included again. Over time, people inside the entertainment industry began to notice. Agents and publicists often tracked where their clients appeared. When a rising celebrity stopped appearing on a major show like Carson's, questions sometimes followed. But the answers were rarely clear. Carson himself almost never discussed these decisions publicly. He preferred to keep the show focused on entertainment rather than conflict. Because of that silence, the story slowly became part of Hollywood rumor. Some people believed the tension during the interview had offended Carson personally. Others thought producers simply wanted to avoid another unpredictable moment. A few observers suggested the situation reflected a larger cultural shift. Younger celebrities were beginning to speak more openly during interviews, while older television formats still expected careful politeness. The clash between those two styles sometimes created uncomfortable television. And that interview seemed to capture one of those moments. Years later, when television historians examined Carson's long career, they noticed that several performers experienced similar quiet exclusions. It was not common, but it did happen. Carson's influence over late-night television was powerful enough to shape guest lists for decades. For the young celebrity involved, her career continued in other areas. She appeared in other programs, other interviews, and other public events. Yet her absence from Carson's stage remained noticeable. Fans who followed late-night television occasionally asked the same question. Why did she never return? Without official confirmation, the answer remained uncertain. And as time passed, the story slowly grew into one of the most curious legends connected to the history of The Tonight Show. But even after decades, the biggest mystery still remained. Was the ban truly caused by that single interview, or was there an even deeper reason that has never been fully explained? Decades have passed since Johnny Carson hosted The Tonight Show. His final episode aired in May 1992, ending a remarkable 30-year run that shaped American late-night television. Yet many of the stories from his era continue to attract attention. Among them is the memory of the interview that quietly ended a guest's appearances on his stage. For fans of classic television, moments like this have become part of cultural history. Old recordings, archived footage, and television documentaries allow new generations to revisit the famous late-night studio. Viewers can still watch Carson's calm delivery, the laughter of the audience, and the relaxed conversations that made the show famous. But some interviews stand out. They feel different. They reveal small cracks in the smooth world of late-night entertainment. The tense interview with the rising celebrity became one of those moments. For years, viewers and media historians have studied the exchange, trying to understand exactly what happened. Some believe the tension was simply the result of two strong personalities meeting on live television. Carson was known for his quiet control of the stage. The guest was known for speaking openly and directly. When those styles met under bright studio lights, the conversation may have naturally drifted into uncomfortable territory. Other observers see the moment as a symbol of a changing entertainment industry. During Carson's early years as host, television interviews followed strict traditions. Guests avoided sensitive topics. Humor remained gentle and controlled. But by the late 1970s and early 1980s, cultural attitudes were shifting. Younger celebrities often wanted to speak honestly about their lives, opinions, and experiences. That honesty sometimes clashed with older television formats. The interview may have reflected that cultural change. Yet the mystery surrounding the alleged ban remains important, because it highlights how powerful a single television platform once was. In Carson's era, one host controlled one of the largest stages in American entertainment. Millions of viewers watched every night. Being welcomed onto that stage could launch a career. Being quietly excluded could close an important door. Modern talk shows operate in a very different world. Today, there are hundreds of television channels, streaming platforms, podcasts, and social media networks. Celebrities can speak directly to audiences through many platforms. No single stage holds the same power Carson's show once had. Still, his influence remains legendary. Johnny Carson helped define late-night television. His style shaped the careers of future hosts and comedians who followed him. And stories from his studio continue to fascinate viewers even today. The interview that ended with a quiet absence remains part of that history. Some believe it was a simple misunderstanding. Others believe it revealed a deeper clash between generations of entertainers. Without clear answers, the story lives on through television archives and industry memories. And even now, long after the studio lights dimmed for the final time, viewers still wonder what truly happened that night. The story of Johnny Carson's stage shows how powerful television once was. A single interview could shape a career forever. If you enjoy discovering hidden moments from entertainment history, consider subscribing for more fascinating documentary stories like this.